So today is probably going to be one of the most personable videos that I've ever really made in a while, and it's really talking about why I really left my corporate job back several years ago. This video was really inspired because I know there's a lot of people that are watching this right now that are either unemployed or maybe they are employed but just not fully satisfied at their jobs, and they're thinking about maybe doing something similar about leaving their jobs for something else as well. But regardless of that reasoning, today is really going to be my personal story about why I left my high-paying corporate job in engineering several years ago in order to do what I do now, which is to work a much more humble job in the entertainment industry. And that's basically what the video is hopefully going to explain. Now, there are some things that we're going to be mentioning in today's video that's going to apply to all corporate or most corporate jobs in general. There are some things that are really going to only apply to my specific industry, being in engineering. And there are some things that are a little bit more personal. They're just more like personal things that really mattered to me at that current time period that really got me to make that transition and leave to do what I currently do now. So that being said, because it's such a personal video, we're just going to get started right on the spot. But as always, if you guys enjoy videos like this, consider smashing the like button, subscribing, hitting the bell, and feel free to leave a comment about honestly just really anything. So with that being said, let's just get this video started. So we're going to run through all of the different points, but I do highly recommend watching through every single minute because I really want to go through details. Even though you can skip around, I think it's really important to just get all of the details to the story from my particular perspective, from my shoes, of what was really going on back at that time several years ago. So the first reasoning why I really left is something that might apply to a lot of corporate jobs, but it is especially true in my particular corporate job, which is really because of work-life balance that I really ended up leaving. It's just because the problem I think with a lot of corporate jobs these days is that even though they claim to be a 9-to-5 corporate job, it's actually very rare from my observation, or certainly rarer from my observation today than it once was several years ago, in order to find a job that was truly from 9 o'clock to 5. Many jobs, especially very high-paying six-figure jobs today, you're talking about hours that are typically a lot longer than 9 to 5. In my particular situation, I was in the engineering world, but specifically in the construction industry, where anybody, even people that like their profession inside of the construction, and I liked my profession even in my time at that time period, but even people that like the profession can attest that anyone that's worked in the engineering construction industry, the hours are really long. We're often talking about like early 6-7 a.m. concrete pours all the way down to like 4-5 p.m. or sometimes even till sunset, or whenever they end up wrapping up, hours, because they have to reach so many different deadlines. And I realize that for a lot of reasons, and I guess this is the part that depends on the person. For me personally, at that time period, I left when I was still in my early 20s. It's wild how many years have already gone by. And so the idea is that at that time period, I realized that there were so many things I wanted to do outside of work, from things such as like social life, side hustles, relationships, personal projects, even just to rest, to take classes, to work on myself in other areas, to just reflect, to journal. There were just so many different things I wanted to do outside, even again, just to enjoy life in general, because I think that a lot of times, one of the biggest differences between my channel and a lot of other channels is that there's a lot of channels I feel that preach the side hustle mentality, where it's all about just grinding through and everything, whereas on my channel, I always preach that I think it's important to at least learn to have fun sometimes, because there is so much more to life than just grinding and hustling all day. Although that's important, there's a lot more to life than that, especially if you're doing it for like some very long-term extenuating period of time. So for me personally, I just felt that the hours that I was working at my job just wasn't really worth it at the end of the day, because it meant that it felt like, even though I loved my job, and again, there's a lot of people I know that do not even like my job. I'm speaking as someone that loved my job at that time period. I just felt that the amount of hours that I was dedicating to it, it just was not worth it at the end, considering that what I had to go through in order to be there. Now, the next reasoning why I really decided to leave my corporate job, this one's actually a lot more specific to my specific industry and my specific just personal situation. So this is not something that applies to every corporate job, although it might, so you guys can feel free to comment down below if it does. But it's really because of social reasons. And it's that because one of the things that I really learned throughout my lifetime and just from bouncing through so many different jobs, which I can talk about, feel free to leave a comment if that's of interest, is really about how much I really value social interaction in any job that I pursue. So I really love to work with people, whether this is about talking in front of a camera or whether this is talking with customers, talking with clients, networking, reaching out. It's just something that I really enjoy. I love talking and being able to interact with people. And I think that for me personally, especially during a time period, I was working a job at that time period in corporate construction where the problem, and again, this is going to be very industry specific, is that the problem I found with my particular industry at that time period is that while the job is actually surprisingly pretty social in the sense that you are talking to a lot of different people, but the problem is that demographically the engineering, and this is more specific to engineering, there's just basically no diversity in that particular industry. In that particular industry, objectively speaking, regardless of who you are, it's objectively speaking statistically over 90% male, not many minorities, and I would even go to say that the demographic is mostly pretty much just straight, conservative, white, male. Nothing about being in that particular demographic, but it's that even if you fit into that demographic, it can be very socially isolating if you're someone that really thrives on diversity. So I tell a lot of people, for me, I really enjoy working with diversity. People that are similar, but also people that are different from me. I think it's really great to have new perspectives. And I think a lot of times the social side of my particular industry, it just didn't deliver. If anything, to be very straightforward, the answer is that it actually felt a little bit socially isolating, actually. Every single day you're coming to work and you're sitting inside of a cubicle all day. The other part of the time you're going to meetings and you're interacting with people. But it seems that every single person is just so similar to each other that makes it very difficult to kind of be yourself, makes it very difficult to kind of meet new people, be yourself, enjoy young life, all that kind of stuff. It was just a very isolating and very difficult time, especially as you watched, as you're working inside of an office where people are already starting to age during a time when it's supposedly, people are already getting busy, marrying, settling down, that it becomes even harder to meet new people in general. That just definitely does not promote and benefit this. I had a relationship fallout at that time period also several years ago that definitely did not support this agenda in any way, shape, or form. But the big bottom line is that in order to try to figure out that, I just felt that in order to be able to build a much larger, healthier, and diverse social circle again, I had to get out and make a lot of changes. And in order to make that change, one of it involved work-life balance, which is what we already just mentioned. And then the second was by getting out of the industry in general in order to find a new crowd and a new social circle that I can call home every single day I walked into. And that's probably the biggest second reason that I really made that transition. Now, moving on to the third reason why I really left my corporate job several years ago is really because of ceilings. And it really has to do with just career-related ceilings. And it's that one of the biggest things that I've also learned, and this is the part that actually does apply to many corporate jobs. There are some exceptions, like I know, for example, in sales, there's no income ceiling, but this isn't even just talking about income ceiling. This is actually talking about ceilings in terms of like lifestyle ceiling as well. And it's that when you work at corporate job, one of the biggest difficulties or one of the biggest restrictions to it is that you're also working under a boss. And because you're working under a boss, it means that there's always going to be a cap, a ceiling, a limit of some kind about where or how far you can potentially go. There is a ceiling to how much money you can make, certainly, but again, we mentioned that this is not just about income. There's certainly also going to be a lot of other ceilings, such as the amount of hours you have to put in, the amount of work-life balance you get, the lifestyle you choose. A lot of it can be very restricting. And I think that because of that reason, in order to chase out more freedom, it was really important for me to kind of consider making that change at that time period. When you work under a boss, at the end of the day, there's always going to be some kind of ceiling that's going on. And for me, and I guess this is the part, insert a more personable side to the story. At that time period when I was graduating college, back several years ago, I felt that I had lost a lot. Like, I mean, in the sense that, I was single. I didn't really have a lot going for me. I didn't really have a vibrant social life at that time period. I was trapped. Everyone was marrying. Everyone was settling in. I was just working, your typical post-college life. I was going to work at that time period. I was coming home, sleeping, figuring out what I was doing. And it just felt very, very repetitive and very, very restrictive at that time period. So because of that reason, I felt that after losing so much at that time period, because keep in mind, I do tell, and this is another background story for another day. We're not going to talk as much about it, but from just general past history, I have lost a job before. I have been fired from work before. I have been laid off from work before. I have chosen to resign my job before. I have also had historical circumstances cause me and everyone in my industry, which is the new industry that I work in, which is in the film and events industry. I have had a lot of people in my industry just end up unemployed because of historical circumstances, like what happened with the pandemic and the situation there. So for me at that time period, feeling that I had lost so much in life, I just felt that whatever I wanted to do in life, I had to pursue whatever could have the most maximum amount of potential regardless of it, because it felt that almost like I could just pursue life almost as if there was nothing left to lose. Because at that time period, there really was almost nothing to lose. I was thinking to myself about my life and I was like, what else is there to lose? At one point I had actually been fired from my job before, so this is something that I had to reflect on, and it made me realize that when I was stripped of so much in my early lifetime period, that now going forward it should be a signal, right, that whatever I do in life, I have to basically pursue it as if there was almost nothing to lose, or as if whatever could potentially open the greatest ceiling possible. And I just felt that being inside of the corporate world, it was just going to put so many different ceilings on what I was going to do. Again, not necessarily in terms of income, but even if it meant in terms of lifestyle, being able to take off when I wanted, being able to have freedom, being able to kind of do my own thing, choose how I want to do things, create my own systems, have my own kind of thing. All of that stuff was really what really applied and made it and was factored into the decision that I ultimately made at that time. And then maybe moving on to the final reason, there are so many reasons that I can share why I left my corporate job. And again, this is a very thought out thing. So if it's of interest and you guys want a part 2, maybe consider commenting down below. But the final reason really is just about what a lot of other jobs just simply offered better. So sometimes, a lot of times, and I think it goes back, is that I never left my corporate job because I didn't like my corporate job. You can definitely argue I didn't like certain areas of my corporate job, but it was never about, certainly at least not the craft of my corporate job, that I didn't like. You can maybe say is that I liked the craft, but I didn't like the actual physical job side of the actual craft itself. But at the end of the day, I think it just came down to, and this is a whole video on its own, so definitely comment if that's of interest, is just like I just felt that a lot of other industries offered more. That's just what it really, really came down to. It was that I ultimately just felt at the end of the day, if someday I ever wanted to rebuild the social circle that I had, to have better work-life balance, to get my freedom back so that I can kind of just do my own thing, to pursue everything else that I just mentioned, beforehand, like passion, hobbies, side hustles, knowledge, working on myself in those areas, figuring out other areas of life, enjoying my youth, all that kind of stuff. I had to get out and make changes, and between everything that happened, it became clear that it was time to maybe resign. I have been fired again, as mentioned, from a job before, and that also factored into the decision. But ultimately, even when I got back employed and I now decided to resign it and then to do what I do now, that was all of the stuff that factored into this decision. But hopefully this kind of just really highlights and shares one anecdote or one story from one person to why he did what he did. So if you guys maybe found that relatively insightful, as always, if you guys haven't done so, maybe consider smashing the like button to share some support, or as always, feel free to leave a comment whether or not you guys can relate, which is okay either way. And as always, consider subscribing and hitting the bell if you guys are interested in seeing similar videos. And we typically make videos about econ, finance, but we also make occasional self-help storytime videos. So with that being said, thank you guys so much for watching. As always, if you guys made it to the end, stay safe, stay well, stay employed, or at least try to stay employed. Or if you are not employed, try to find ways to survive and embrace it. And hope to see you guys next time. Thank you guys so much again.